What's up, everyone? Welcome back, and thank you for your time. Well, let me tell you, it's been a long couple of weeks. In the last video, I told you guys that my car wouldn't start. Couldn't figure out why. I was on the phone, off the phone, on the phone, MSD techs. I mean, I like MSD products. I like their ignitions, but I think their techs might need to go back to school. And I will explain why. So wow, where do I even really start? So I attempted to start the Camaro, kicked it over, had it running, trying to warm it up, get some heat in it so it she'd idle and I could roll it out. Had it running for like, I don't know, maybe a minute, 1500, 2000 RPMs, and out of nowhere, boom, just shut right off. Tried to restart it, crank. I was pretty sure I had a ignition problem because I had plenty of fuel, everything was running. I'm running race gas. So MSD has a series of tests they want you to do to see where the problem lies. And the first thing I did was check the crank trigger. I pulled the crank trigger wire apart like they tell you to do in the directions. I have a rig I made out of an old crank trigger wire. You just unplug your crank trigger, you plug this in, and at the other end you have two loose wires. I plug it in. You're supposed to crack these two wires together. It's supposed to see some kind of RPM, so they recommend doing like 90 times a minute, I think it was. Anyway, you do it as fast as you can and you get spark. So I was getting spark at the coil doing that, and in the directions it says, if you get spark doing that, you don't need to test any further, your coil is good. So that is fine. That's great. So I had spark at the coil, and the way I figured that out was I pulled the boot off of the distributor. I then plug it onto this spark plug, and I put it in the windshield where I can see it. The vice grips are on there holding a wire on to ground, and then I have it grounded right here. Well, I had spark doing that test. So, okay. So what I do from there is I plug my crank trigger back in. I plug the crank trigger back in down here. Use the same spark plug in the same rig so I can see it from inside the car. My dad wasn't available. It's kind of tricky doing this stuff by yourself. So I get in there, I crank it over. I had good voltage at the battery. Every time that crank trigger came around, it hit a magnet. That thing fired when it was supposed to. Makes no sense, right? Absolutely no sense. So I put the coil wire back on. Coil must be good. Crank trigger's good. I even went as far as changing the eye on the crank trigger. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have some spare parts laying around. So did that, everything checked out. Tried to start the car again. Nothing. Nada. Zilch. Wouldn't do anything. Okay. Now I'm completely baffled. Now on the grid, in the directions, it says to pull apart the Deutsch connector, pull out, doesn't even say pull out, it says isolate the white wire, put the white wire to 12 volts, hold it there, shouldn't have to pull it away, and you'll have multiple sparks. All right, cool. Well, at this time, I think we're in week 2. I'm still pulling what's left of my hair out. My dad comes over. We're trying to figure it out. The directions are really, really vague. It just says isolate the white wire, put it to 12 volts. It doesn't say to pull it out of the Deutsch connector. Don't know if that's what we're supposed to do. We're putting probes down there. So Pops, he jumps on Yellow Bullet real quick on his phone, and he finds somebody on there that says you actually physically have to pull it out of the Deutsch connector, then plug it back in, which makes a lot of sense because now everything's getting power. We were scratching our heads on how that's supposed to work. So we did that and put it to 12 volts. Spark plug fired off great. Go back to the MSD directions. If this all lines up and you have spark, you are okay. Perfect. You don't have anything to worry about. Okay, great. So I decide to ohm out the coil. I'm ohming out the coil and I'm getting 0 on everything. Makes no sense to me. So I call up my buddy Jeremy. I'm telling him about it. He has a friend who just so happens to have the same coil I'm running. He sold it to me, very cheap, great deal. I ran over there, picked it up, came home. Like a fool, I didn't ohm it out. I threw it on the car thinking, we got this beat, right? Everything else checks out with the ignition, must be the coil on its way out. Okay, sure. So I put that on there, don't check anything, crank, nothing. Go back through steps 1, 2, and 3 all over again with that coil. Can't figure it out. So I climb up into my attic, I find an old blaster 2, which really you shouldn't be running with the grid. Plug that in, fired the car right up. So now I'm thinking, okay, I have 2 bad coils, right? How can that possibly be? Two bad coils. No, that is not making any sense. None. So, reluctantly, I got on the phone and called MSD. Talked to one of their tech guys. Explained to him the entire scenario, everything I did. He told me I did everything right. And he told me my distributor was bad. Now, mind you, I just put a new cap and rotor on it. How could it? I don't understand. It's bad. So I explained to him, it's a crank trigger. There's nothing in the distributor. What can go bad? There's no weights, there's no springs, there's no magnets, there's no pickup. What's going to go bad? He told me that it needed to be rebuilt because it grounded out. Okay. I don't agree with him. But what the heck? Okay. So I wait a half hour. I call MSD back. I get a different tech. I tell the tech everything, all over again. Everything. He tells me that I have to do the test. I told him I tested everything. He said, you need to do the test. Okay. Got off the phone. Guess what I did? Waited a half hour, called MSD back. Got a different tech. Go through everything with him again. He says, you got a bad coil. I'm leaning towards him. Sounds about right. So, okay, I got a bad coil. I said, but I just bought one out of a running car. It was good. He goes, no, you got 2 bad coils. Okay. So, got two bad coils. So, I buy a 3rd coil. Coil shows up. I lay it on the cow of the car. Right there. Hooked up all the wires. Put a spark plug in the coil wire. Jumped out my crank trigger. It wouldn't do anything. Just clicked. Click, 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 wouldn't do anything. Okay. Now I'm concerned. So, yeah, this is all the stuff I've bought in the last 3 to 4 weeks. So now I'm concerned. All right, maybe it is a distributor. So I buy a brand new MSD Pro Billet crank trigger distributor. Toss it in the car. Guess what happened? If you're guessing the car didn't start, you, my friend, are right. Because the car did not start. So now I am getting pissed. I just bought a trailer. I got a side-by-side. We're ready to go to the track and the car doesn't want to start. Everybody I call MSD doesn't seem to know what they're talking about. I did fail to mention that during all these tests, it had spark, but it was like, it wasn't great spark. It was whitish, bluish spark. But if an MSD blaster started the car, why wouldn't anything else start the car? So I decided to go off on my own, screw MSD. It has to be the box, right? I have to buy a new box. Well, guess what? Yep, it was the box. I got the box today, got off of work, saw it on the porch, ran out here, called my pop, told him about it. He's excited. He's a little reserved about it because we're having such bad luck. It's a plug and play deal. Unplugged 2 wires, plug in 2 wires, I left it laying on the floor. And don't you know, it freaking fired the car. The box was bad. The box was bad. So now, my old coil is good. Bad cap and rotor. New cap and rotor. We know the MSD blaster is good. That's the brand, the one in the middle right here, that's the brand new coil that wouldn't run. This one right here is the one I bought from my buddy Jeremy's friend. Then we have the old grid box. That coil right there is the original coil. Like, I get it. It's hard diagnosing electronics over the phone. I was very, very thorough with everything I was telling them, and I felt like nobody wanted to listen to what I was saying. I felt like they were reading it right off a computer screen. They had no practical knowledge of what was actually going on. I don't know. I don't know, guys. I was pissed. And trying to diagnose everything, oh my God. Look, I got wires pulled out. I'm tracing wires, looking for bad grounds, looking for connections, checking everything for 12, at least having 12 volts going into it. My battery has 13.5 volts. It's charging all the time. It's 13.5 resting. Yeah, I don't know. So I guess you can't always trust the quote unquote experts. But I'll show you real quick the white wire they're talking about on this grid. This is my old box. This is the Deutsch connector they're talking about. You physically have to take this wire out, plug it back into your grid, then take this wire and touch it up against 12 volts. As soon as you do that, you should have multiple sparks. I did. Like, it was weak spark, like I told them, but they said weak spark is spark. So who am I to argue with them, right? So with all that being said, hopefully within the next week or two, I can get this car to the track. All I really wanted to do was wash it the other day, well, a few weeks ago. Couldn't even manage to do that. So I know this video isn't really helping anybody out. It's just more me ranting. You know, the money you spend for quality parts, they say you get what you pay for. Well, I don't know. I think the world's all screwed up. You don't get quality help. You don't get what you're paying for these days. So anyway, sorry about the rant. Just the way it's kind of been for me the last few weeks. The only thing I really wanted to do is build out that trailer so I get it exactly the way I want it before I take it to track. Now at least I can focus on that. There's a positive, right? You know, maybe I can get going more on this Nova now. You know, right there. Now that the car's running again. So anyway, all that, I'm gonna go checking out. I hope you guys are still working on those projects out in the shop. Keep challenging yourself. You know, do me a favor, comment, like, and subscribe, share if you can, and talk to you guys later.